I will call the meeting to order. Clerk Smith, please call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilcoxon,
Present.
Mayor Brown,
Present.
Councilmember Sweet,
Present.
Councilmember Tucson,
Present.
Councilmember Simmons,
Present.
Councilmember King.
Present.
With 6 present, we have quorum.
Please rise as you're able for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. All right. I will entertain a motion for agenda approval.
So moved. Support.
Any changes, updates, or anything to the agenda?
I'd like to add a discussion about the city manager process after the Ward 2 candidate interviews have been conducted and before public comment.
After, okay. Any other updates or changes?
Is there a second for that? Support.
All right. Okay. All in favor of the agenda with the addition, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. This is our first opportunity for public comment. You'll have 3 minutes to address council. So when I call on those in the audience, please come to the podium and state your name and address if you feel so comfortable. And then we'll move to those on Zoom. So was there anyone signed up? No? Okay. And is there anyone in the audience who would like to address council? Is there anyone on Zoom?
Anybody on Zoom would like to speak, press the raise hand button. Nope.
All right, seeing none, we will close public comment and move into our first Ward 2 candidate interview. So council, we were given 2 sets of the questions. There's 12 of them, so I figured we would just kind of go around the table like we did before, if there's no objection to that. All right, and then I do who's doing the introduction? Okay.
So the first candidate is Patrick McLean. We're going to give you a couple minutes to introduce yourself, make an opening remark. And as the mayor said, they will go around, each council member will ask you a couple of questions, and then there will be time at the end for any follow-ups. Go ahead and please give us your opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council, staff, press, guests. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you tonight about my interest in the Ward 2 council position. I'm Patrick McLean. I am a 20-year resident of Normal Park. I have been here along with my family, my wife, Angela, who's been engaged herself in the community in countless ways, including most recently with the Ypsilanti Artisan Markets. My son, Ian, who has, much to my pride and relief, made it through high school, product of Ypsilanti Public Schools, and he is off now at Central State University. I would start out by saying that I really love this city. I remember the first time thinking that when I was working on a project on the Rutherford Pool, and I remember going with a couple other neighbors, talking to a few developers, and we had some general ideas about how much money that would cost. And we knew it was going to be several $100,000. And it was getting closer to $1 million. And people were just looking at us like, that's never going to happen. But this was a group of people that would not say no and kept working. And you all know the final story. And I realized the reason I like the city so much is because of its people. Right? It's got a great physical footprint, great downtown, depot town, neighborhoods, but the people are really what makes this city, I think, great. Good people, and also really knowledgeable and really capable. Ypsilanti has its challenges, like all cities. I'm sure we're going to spend some time tonight talking about some of those. But I'm here to offer my assistance as a potential council member with 30 years and some of experience in state government, local government, and city government, both in Michigan and in Ohio. I also have significant experience in higher education, particularly relevant there that I've taught state and local government classes for about 8 years at Albion College, and also created my own class called Innovative Cities. So it's not just Ypsilanti that I love, but I love urban spaces. I love thinking about and talking about and learning about how cities work, what makes them work, what makes them struggle, and how do you get through the challenges. The last thing I'll say is I'm a walker. I love walking around the city. I know that Detroit is the motor city, and I know that there's cars are a big deal around here, but I like to walk. And I think it's a great way to see any city and to have a perspective where you really see the details. And so that's another perspective I think I bring to the table. So I'll leave that as the introduction, and we'll be happy to talk about whatever you would like to talk about.
Thank you. So I guess we'll just go left to right. Here's left, right, like we did last time. So you can go ahead with the first question, Councilmember Tucson.
All right, thank you. So what experience do you have with the operations of a municipal government?
I've worked with several municipal governments, but I think what I would do is focus on the one that is probably most relevant, and that's the city of Toledo. I was the finance director there for Mayor Mike Bell from early 2010 until the middle end of 2013. Served as finance director for a city with about 2,600 staff and about when I started, about a $220 million general fund budget, about $586 million in all funds. And I would tell you that was the toughest job that I've ever had. And if you look at my resume, you see I've had lots of jobs. But that one was a serious challenge. I came in 2010. If you know your economic history, that was coming out of the Great Recession. We faced there about a $22 million deficit. I'm sorry, $48 million deficit. It was about 22% of that $220 million budget. And that wasn't even the hardest challenge. We also, prior to mayor taking office, the prior administration had committed the city to a $14 million ERP project, enterprise resource planning project, basically the computer guts behind everything, all the operations in the city. And it was frankly way too much horsepower. It was run by SAP that you may have heard of. And I used to tell the council members there that they had purchased a Ferrari. We really just needed a Ford. But we had to make that thing work. And it's like buying something that you really don't know how to operate. We were talking about phones before and smartphones before the meeting here. And most of us, I suspect it's fair to say, probably utilize, I don't know what, 4, 5, 6% of the capacity of those things. But that was my real baptism by fire, is trying to solve those budget problems and work on that ERP project. And the short version of the way we got through it is that we went out into the community and told people this is our challenge. We had to work with labor unions. We had labor negotiations. We had to reopen contracts, which is never a fun thing, with the fire folks and the police unions. We had to look just about under every place you could imagine where there would be some money. But we did some really successful things there. We in fact monetized our parking revenues. We were in the business as a city of not only collecting the revenues from our parking meters, but running a bunch of garages, which had deferred maintenance. And we did a really lousy job as a city of doing all that. We took the whole operation and monetized it by farming it out to another organization. They were able to keep the jobs of the people that had been in those positions. And we were also able to not only bring in a large chunk of money, one-time money to solve the budget problem, but also to this day, they still are bringing in, I think, about $350,000 a year in ongoing revenue streams. We structured it in a way that would work out for not just the one-time money, but for ongoing helping the city's revenue structure. So maybe the last thing I'll say about that, and we can go into more of it if you like. But I actually love budgets. Maybe that's already coming through, but I know that's kind of a strange thing to say, or a strange attribute. Not everybody feels that way. In fact, very few people feel that way from what I can tell. But I'm that rare bird for whatever reason.
Thank you.
Okay. What are some of the most important qualities a council member should possess? What do you believe your role on city council will be for our community?
I hope that every council member, I hope all of you, I hope every council member in every city in this country believes that the city is for everybody, right? That the city belongs not to one group or another group, but to every person in that city. One of my real kind of urban or writers, thinkers was Jane Jacobs, and she had a quote that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. And so I think a council member has to come with that kind of an approach, has to be reaching out, in this case, not just to Ward 2, but to the entire city, and care that everyone is successful, and that one group is not successful at the expense of another. We're trying to create win-win situations here. So I think that's the first part. I think any council member should be willing to get out in the community and spend a lot of time in that community, listening to people. If I were selected, it would be my intention to have regular coffee hours, for example, or get out and talk with various groups, and find ways that people can communicate, no matter where their station is in life. They want to communicate by email or phone. That's one thing. If they need me to come visit, that's another thing. But I'll be available. I'll be visible. So I think those are two of the main areas that I would emphasize.
Thank you.
If appointed, what is the biggest asset you would bring to council? And how would you work to achieve or incorporate that within the rest of council?
I mentioned at the outset that I love cities. I love urban spaces. I created that class called Innovative Cities. And so this is something that I spend time in, I read about, and I think I would bring to the council some knowledge of what other cities are doing in other areas. You know, Ypsilanti faces challenges, but so does every other city in the country, for all practical purposes. There's a few that might be lucky enough not to have big challenges. I was walking through Birmingham, Michigan, not too long ago. They might be fine. But other than that, most of us live in the real world and face real world problems. And because of that, there's innovation going on all over the place. And it's even beyond our shores. There's a model for example, budget participation from cities in Porto Alegre in Brazil, that has been a model and has been used by American cities. So some knowledge of what other cities do, what can be done. I think I would bring that kind of curiosity to if we have a problem, what do we do and what have others done? I also am, I think by nature, look for ways to collaborate. And so I would look for opportunities to collaborate with the county, with the state, with other municipalities and townships in our area.
Hello. Number 4, explain your understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and how you see these interplay in Ypsilanti, and how would you support the advancement of racial equity in Ypsilanti?
Thanks for the question. It's a great question, and I'm curious to see around the country some pushback. So I'm always glad. One more reason to be proud of Ypsilanti, because I think Ypsilanti has not backed down at all from that commitment to DEI. Oh, I would say at the outset, I have had an interest in finding ways to bring diversity, equity, and inclusion to whatever workplace that I am in. my current workplace. We're working on a plan. We're not too far along yet, but we're doing that. I brought in a consultant when I worked at Albion College for my institute. It was called the Ford Institute for Leadership in Public Policy and Service, and brought in a consultant to try to build a way for all of our students to be more mindful, more thoughtful, and for us to incorporate more people from the community into what had been for many years more of an exclusive program on campus. But my understanding in the context of Ypsilanti goes back to the statement that I made at the outset, that idea that the city is for everybody. Right. Diversity is a strength. That is one of my core beliefs. It's unfortunately clearly not shared by everybody in this country. But I think cities, for that matter, organizations, businesses, anyone who recognizes that then has the benefit of having the skills, the knowledge that all of the different groups, all of the different people bring to the table. So recognizing that it's not just something that should be done because it's the right thing to do, but recognizing that it's the opportunity, it's really the only way to run a business or to run a city, is to recognize that everybody has skills, everybody has knowledge, everybody has a perspective that is valuable and can be utilized. So my hope would be that the city would deal with DEI in a way where it's ongoing. It's not a written report that you do and leave it sitting on a shelf and maybe consult it every now and then. But rather it's something that you aspire to and keep going back to. I think some of the core elements are making sure that first and foremost in the city's own processes that they are following those core beliefs. So for example, when you're doing purchasing or letting contracts, that you're making sure that everybody has an opportunity to bid. When you are hiring people, you make sure that you are hiring and using hiring processes that will generate a pool of applicants that is at least representative of your city. And this is, I think, an area of real possible strength for a city that takes it seriously. All too often, I find cities or other organizations that lament the fact that they haven't hired enough people of color, for example, and they say, well, we just didn't have enough applicants. And the problem is they didn't think about it at the beginning when you go out and look for those applicants and put out the position description and the job opening to more places. I have worked places that have said, if we don't have a pool of applicants that looks like our city in this case, then we're not going to go forward with the interviews until we do have that pool. And so that's one way to kind of to push that envelope a little bit. So hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Why have you decided not to run during an election? Since this position will be up for an election in November, how will you be sure to still run a campaign that allows residents to learn about you even with a short-term incumbency?
Well, I've been involved in politics in different ways, different forms for a lot of years, and I recognize that sometimes you don't have total control over when an opportunity might come up. One of the questions that I thought you might ask, and you might still, is why I want to be a council member. And I talked a little bit about loving the city. But one of the other reasons right now, this to your question, I think, is that the timing is right. As probably you know from my resume, my current job is actually in Columbus, Ohio. And about a month ago, I learned that my elected official, in this case, the elected coroner of Franklin County, will not have an opponent in the fall. And for me, as the chief of staff, that changes everything. I went to him and said, all right, you don't have an opponent. This is something I'd like to do. I will only do it with your support. And so he has he has given me that blessing and that support. So the opening came. I have a chance right now because the work situation is such, and my son, as I mentioned, has just gone away to college. Being a dad was a job as well. And some days, as my wife will attest, a tough one. But this is a time where it I think sort of makes sense in the context of my life. But then to the other part of your question, I will have to get out into the community, and I'll do that. I will get people to know me. A lot of people in my neighborhood do know me. But I'll continue to push that. I give you my word on that. And I'll certainly be interested in going out and seeing the broader community as well. And if selected, would look to all of you in your districts to go out and introduce me there as well, to the extent that I might not already know people in those areas. So I'll be out and about, but I'll also, believe very much in getting out and communicating with people, as I did even when I was an elected member of the Washtenaw Community College Board of Trustees some years ago. And I had the good fortune of running unopposed in one of those elections, got 98.5% of the vote, but still went out and pounded the pavement and went to some events and used that as an opportunity to get to know people. And I'm still trying to figure out who the 1.5% of the people are that didn't vote for me.
Good evening. This
Good
question
evening.
kind of relates to the one you just answered. How would you work to do community engagement within Ward 2 and help build trust with the residents?
Well, thanks for the question, and I think it's very relevant. But I would say, with all due respect, I think I have a lot of connections in the community already, and that is part of the reason that I want to be part of this. I believe a number of them maybe have communicated with you over the last couple of days. I have loved being part of the community. We are people who sit on our front porch and invite people who walk by. Sometimes we know them, sometimes we don't. But it is not uncommon for people that we didn't even know before to wind up sitting on our front porch with us and try to avoid having our dog jumping into their lap. I think we are outgoing by our nature, and so I already know a lot of people. I'll get to know even more people, and I'll do that through continuing to be engaged in the community, but also attending more organizational meetings and different groups in the community as well, and offer my availability to those groups.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How would you approach a situation in which your personal opinion conflicts with the majority of your constituents?
Every situation probably is a little bit different, and it's hard. That's a tough hypothetical. It's a good question, but it's a tough hypothetical to answer. But I suspect that perhaps all of you have been maybe in that situation or had cases where your constituents feel other ways. What I would tell you is that first, I have some core beliefs, what I've heard people sometimes call first principles, right? And nothing. I like to believe that I'm never going to vote or take a position that runs against those core beliefs. So, for example, the belief in everyone's right to vote, for example, or everyone's right to participate, or the right for everyone, regardless of their background, to be part of the community. If all my constituents suddenly rose up and didn't want to include certain people, because of their racial background or their religious background, that would conflict with my core beliefs, and I like to believe my core beliefs would win out then. But my goal would always be to seek out that opinion from people and to have a good sense for where where my constituents are. And if the time comes where I feel for some reason that that's not the right opinion, I would spend a lot of time with them trying to explain that. I've known some state representatives, for example, who always explain their vote. They go on their webpage, and each vote they take, they say, here's why I voted this way or that way. I think being thoughtful that way is an important element as well. So there's not one hard and fast rule, but it's a real challenge, and I think I take it on a case by case basis. And then there's the prevailing view of the council and the mayor as well, and that matters, right? And so sometimes maybe there's three positions, right? The council's in one place, and I'm in another place, and the constituents are in something else. It happens, but you try to navigate it as well as you can, and sometimes that's part of what the deliberative process is all about, where you try to find common ground between all those elements.
Thank you.
Hello again. How do you handle criticism?
My wife is to the right. Maybe she should answer. I hope that's true. I try to believe that I can always grow, that I can always learn. I do believe in being a lifelong learner. I think that's I used to describe to my students, I would tell them that knowledge is when you realize how little you actually know and how much more there is to know. And so I've got a long way to go. I think I handle criticism fairly well. I think it also depends on the context that it's given. I try to go back to my situation, the work that I did in Toledo when I was the finance director there. It was one of the few times where I remember really losing my temper, and it was with one member of council who I think was trying to score really cheap political points, and happened to be at my expense. And I was sitting in the back of the room and couldn't respond, and everybody knew I was back there, and he just lobbed this grenade at me, and I remember going to him and saying, look, I have worked hard for you and I've respected you, and I expect the same from you. If you disagree with me, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But the way you express that disagreement, has damaged our relationship. And I like to think that doesn't happen too often, because I built the good relationships in the first place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What do you think is the area of largest concern currently for the city as an organization, and how do you propose the city address this concern?
Well, this is the elephant in the room, maybe, huh? It's hard to pick one. And you had a similar question. I think you asked about three in the written questions. And I remember sitting up when I was answering these questions and thinking, this is the one I'm going to answer last. Right. And the way I answered it, you would look and see that I didn't mention specifically in those three, I didn't mention housing. And yet I know that housing, including homelessness, but not only homelessness, is a huge issue here in Ypsilanti. What I did write down was education. And I believe that's still, that would be the answer I would give you to my question. But it requires, I think, some pretty detailed explanation. Right? Education comes in lots of shapes and sizes. It is much more than the traditional, we think of K-12 or post-secondary education. It's more than Head Start. It's more than the traditional schooling, but it is all of the sum of all of the ways that children growing into adults learn and are able to ultimately navigate their way through their lives, through their challenges, through whatever life may throw at them. And as I thought about the housing issue, I was reading a comment that someone had made about the problem is simple. The problem with homelessness is people need houses. Well, there's an attractiveness to that simplicity, but yet we all know that neither we nor most cities in the country have fully found a way to address some of those issues. And so it's probably not so simple. And so when I think about I'm talking about education, but I'm going to come back to that. But I use that to explain kind of how we have to deal with our housing challenges. Any population that is unhoused clearly needs the physical structures. But in addition to that, most research will suggest that population, it will differ by city, but there are some common elements. A good percentage of that population may be struggling with mental health challenges, typically 19 to 30%. A good portion of that population may be struggling with substance use issues, maybe drugs, maybe alcohol, maybe both, upwards of 50%. A good number of that population is struggling with maybe more temporary problems, but something like domestic violence. That could be, and that just differs wildly city to city. And so when people find themselves in these situations of homelessness, I think of homelessness as more a symptom rather than a problem by itself, right? People have these challenges, maybe substance abuse and substance use disorder. It may be mental health challenges. It may be they simply don't have a job. But all of those, navigating each of those things goes back to education somehow, some way. Those that don't have education, the less education you have, the more likely you are to be unemployed. The more, education or mental health is not tied so much. It's not that linear relationship the way it is with joblessness, because mental health issues affect people across all strata. But nonetheless, those issues, if you have education, in this case, education about what providers are in the area, what sources of support are in the area. It's a different form of education, but you need that. And if you have that, you have a fighting chance to get out from under that. So that is a bit of a roundabout answer, I think. But it's one that tries to say that a lot of our challenges, including the challenges with housing, go back to education. And I do believe that one of the roles of city council is to make sure that education in all of its forms is available to all of our citizens who need it. Right? It's not that we at city council should be trying to take over the job of the K through 12 folks, not at all. But we should be making sure that they have the resources they need. Having just had my son through that, through those last 12 years, I know that they struggle for resources. They struggle as our students go away to other schools, and the way the state's funding system works is those dollars follow them right out the door. Right. And so we have, that's a good example of where we at the council ought to be banging the drum and saying, fund our schools properly.
Comes to another sort of financial question. Given that the city of Ypsilanti has the highest property taxes in the area, what strategy would you use to decrease this burden on residents?
Love that question, Councilman. Use that opportunity to take some water. You know, I'm not sure there's a tax here in Ypsilanti that I haven't voted for, because it's usually for a good purpose. That said, I think we have to be sensitive, and the voters have been have responded several times over the last couple of decades to say there might be some limits. And I think we have to make sure that the dollars that we are getting, for starters, we have to be as efficient as we possibly can be. And so if we are, you know, there is no easy answer to that question. In most cities, and this is no exception, most of the money in the city budget goes to hiring people. It's a whole bunch of bodies. In most cities, it's police and fire personnel. And in most cities, those dollars are used not just for salaries, but for benefits, including healthcare benefits that most cities want to give to their employees. And those costs just keep going up through the roof, sometimes double-digit increases in a year. So just keeping status quo is a challenge by itself, when the reality is that the increase in taxes can't grow even with valuation. There's limits per state law. So we don't get very far by saying be efficient, but that said, we have to be efficient, right? Just to keep, you know, you're not gonna be able to be efficient your way into tax cuts, certainly. But then I think the other opportunity is to go and search for other sources of dollars to leverage dollars where they might be available. So, for example, in the housing area, I believe states are allowed to include supportive services in housing under Medicaid. And if Michigan allows that, we should be doing that if we are engaged in housing programs, for example. We should look for every opportunity to leverage other dollars. We should get involved with small and large private foundations and have partnerships. And we should also be looking at the largest fish in the pond in our community is Eastern Michigan University. We're all sensitive to as they sometimes add additional square footage to their footprint and take another piece of property off the tax rolls. But they also bring more resources than almost any other institution in our community. And so we've got to find a way to work with them, leverage whatever resources they have. So I'm not sure I have a formula. Actually, I'm sure I don't have a formula for you to reduce the taxes, but I think we have to be incredibly vigilant to find a way to keep taxes where they are and not have them go up more than they are.
If the city received $1 million grant, where would you allocate or prioritize the funding?
You know, this would be a perfect opportunity, I think, to talk about the process before talking about exactly what the money should be used for. And if I could, I would tell you a story of two parks. There's a park in Albion, Michigan, and a park in Columbus, Ohio. And the park in Columbus and the park in Albion are both beautiful parks. They're in areas that have struggled economically, but they got some resources, they got some money, and they built themselves parks. And one of those parks is used 21 years later, every day, busy all the time, looks great. The other one has fallen into disrepair, and is not used much. And the difference between the two was the process. The one in Albion, they got some money and they went into the schools and started talking to the kids and said, what do you want to see in your park? And then they started talking to community groups and said, what do you want to see in the park? And when they finally did build that park, they built it with volunteer labor, and they brought all the people together. And that was that park, and the people that built that park have a sense of ownership about that park, right? And that's what placemaking is about. Right? Sometimes people think placemaking is about the places. It sounds like it, but in fact, placemaking is all about the people. And that other park in Columbus was built by one person, unfortunately, who ran a community development corporation. I think she meant well, but it got referred to, and I won't even use her name, but let's call her Jane. They refer to it as Jane's Park. It's not our park, it's Jane's Park. And nobody wanted to use Jane's Park because Jane didn't ask anybody what they wanted about that park. And it I cry every time I go past the place because it was beautiful. It was just as beautiful, maybe more beautiful than the one in Albion, Michigan. But the one in Albion, Michigan has people tied to it. So, I could see money being used for housing issues and for addressing the homelessness situation, and that might make some good sense. I could see the money being used spread around in neighborhoods. I could see it being used for making sure that we have a full and complete inventory of the contamination on Water Street, so we know where that stands and can get that developed as fast as possible. But I think it would be really presumptuous of me to jump in and say, okay, we should use it for this, or this. But I do feel strongly that we should have a process that honors the people that should be benefiting, and that's not the members of council, that's the people. So that's an indirect answer to your question. I hope that's okay.
If there was one aspect of government you could change, what would it be and why?
I hope and I believe that this isn't true here, but what I lament on a daily basis is that compromise has become a dirty word in way too much of this country. I have had friends who have served in Congress, and they come back almost all bitter and feeling like they got nothing done. Right? A lot of them go back to their city councils. They go run for mayor, or they maybe go to the state legislature, but really back to city and county offices where they feel like they actually can get things done. But the party labels have become so poison, and people have been so, I think, enslaved by their ideologies. They're on one side or the other. It is so hard to find middle ground. I used to draw some diagrams on the board with my students, where back in the day there was such things as a liberal Republican and a conservative Democrat, and so where those two polar ends kind of crossed over each other was the point where compromise was made and where real things got done. That's how the great civil rights legislation of the 1960s got passed. It could never get passed today unless one party had control of 60 seats in the Senate. And so that's the one. I think government has the potential to be poisoned at almost every level, and it's our job here, whether we're on council or not. It's all of our job to keep that poison from seeping into our local politics.
Thank you.
So those are all of our formal questions. What questions, if any, do you have for us, or anything that you would like to share with us that you did not get to share via the questions?
I don't know if we have enough time to answer this question, but one question that would probably require an answer from each of you. And I wonder why each of you wants to be on city council. And and I wonder, I'm especially interested in those who have been on for a little while, because I wonder why you still want to be on council. It's a tough job. I mean, I recognize it takes a lot of your time. What are the, maybe my question is, what are the rewards? What do you see for you? What's the value?
I would say for me, part of me enjoying being up here on council is giving people that look like me, younger girls, the thought that they can do this one day. That is one of the huge ones. And the other part is just knowing that I can be a part of a beautiful community and make changes and bring forth residents' voices.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, it's not too dissimilar. I definitely am in this space because of recognizing a need to have different voices to be able to be heard on the same level playing ground as others, and especially folks that have not been invited into power or decision-making spaces. And so wanting to be able to uphold and provide ample space for that. And then the other thing I would say is an opportunity, you know, being in council in particular and thinking about policy, and also having a space to connect with residents and neighborhoods in different ways, to try to connect things that are happening on the ground, maybe in less formal spaces, with things that are happening in more formal spaces or in policy, and trying to think about how do we align our policy level work with those needs in, you know, maybe interesting ways, sometimes mundane ways. But when there's ways to have those things come together, that's really exciting to me to explore and to see people see themselves in the space in a different way.
Thank you.
Thought about this question in a number of different ways. When I was first seeking to be appointed, I looked at it in a very personal way, and you know, I thought that the experience that I had and the skills that I had would be helpful to my community, and was an opportunity to change things that I thought were not going well. As I've sat in this seat for the last 5 years, it has become much more community oriented than I originally thought that it had been. But being in the community, you know, I was a part of the community before, but being able to have conversations about meaningful, you know, projects and what you know, my neighbors deemed was important, and being able to bring that and have those conversations. You know, you touched on this in one of the other questions. You know, not everybody agrees in our work, and having those conversations to get at the commonality and see what is important to those folks and bring that forward. It's about making a change and making life better for everyone in our community.
Thank you.
Having served the city prior to my role on council on a city commission for several years, and my educational and work background, prior and current, to this role, I thought made me well suited for the position and able to go from, the way that I was serving the city as a capacity of a commissioner to this role, and having neighbors and residents of the ward that are very supportive, appreciative, are able to have conversation with, discuss dialogue, bring things forward, has been very important to myself and to those residents as well. So, and I think that they, have shown me that they see value and appreciation for that. So.
I've been here a long time now. I first set foot in this space as a 17-year-old, a part of a youth group that was coming to present to council about what was important to young people because we felt like our voice wasn't being heard at that time. And so as I became a young adult in this community, I attended Eastern Michigan University, and the opportunity presented itself. After lots of consideration, I never saw myself here. But I thought that it would be a great opportunity to bring a different perspective, especially based on the configuration of the council at that time, to have some youth voice at the table. And from there, as I learned more and I grew more, being a catalyst for change has always been one of my goals. I'm a social worker. It's my code of ethics is to do for others, right? Create space for others, lift voices. And so not much different than what some of my colleagues said about having folks see themselves here and recognizing that they too can do this work. But also the connection to the community. And it is hard, and they are really trying times in this work and being on this side of the table, but ultimately being able to create positive change in legislation and do things that are to the benefit of my neighbors and to those young folks coming up behind us, and being able to work with my colleagues on like collaborative change is what fuels me and drives me to go forward, even on the days where I'm like, what is happening right now? But overall, that desire for change is what keeps me here.
If I could make a quick comment on that. I mean, I'd love your focus on the youth, and I have to say it used to I think it's fair to say it would crush my wife and me when we would hear our son talk about, I need to get out of Ypsi a little bit. I need to go somewhere. That's part of the education, the question that I was trying to answer and in a maybe convoluted way, but I want people to see value in their community from a young age, and they're only going to see value if they feel valued themselves. And that part of that is bringing them into places like this.
Changed my life.
Really what got me to want to participate on the mayor said on this side of the table was really participation, engagement, and relationship building. So I grew up on Ward 1, south side of Ypsi, and I played in Park Ridge Park for forever, right? And I wanted to see the places in my specific ward and around the rest of the city beautified, right? I wanted, like you just said, I wanted to have the youth have a sense of pride in their city, so that we don't hear more of, I need to get out of Ypsi, right? Because I heard a lot of that in high school as well. So really it's just that, pride of my city, trying to increase engagement with the youth and with the people in my ward and around the city. And just engagement and participation. Yeah.
Time for one more?
Like if it's a short one.
Well, I'll mention it and then just see if anybody even wants to comment. But one of the answers to the written questions I had, we didn't end up touching on this, but I had raised the issue of climate resiliency and the need to evaluate our infrastructure capacity right now. So I am curious to know if there's interest in that from members of council. I think it's the crisis that's not on anybody's mind because it hasn't been a crisis yet. But the rains are coming and they've come to other places and good management is the crisis that doesn't happen. So
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
Answer that. So I'll answer this quickly, but definitely always happy to talk more about climate resiliency. Before I was on council, I was on the Sustainability Commission, and I am currently the council liaison to the Sustainability Commission. And one of the things, a project that we've been doing and talking about within that space is around resiliency hubs specifically. And actually early on in my council days, I was working with some folks from the commission as well as some residents actually in Ward 3 to actually work on a big grant. So if you're talking about leverage, trying to figure out ways to leverage funds, we were working on a grant around this resiliency hubs piece. And so I think that there is a lot of work that we can do in this area, both in terms of, so Park Ridge, there's some space at Park Ridge Park that is was a part of creating a resiliency hub there. But I think that we have to think about how it spreads throughout the city, and actually like the different spaces might have different specialties at those hubs, right? So like being able to have some place where people can go, what that looks like, being able to have places that where people can like have access to energy to like charge their phone and computer, right? Are different things. So I think this is something that we need to think about in those kind of ways. But I also think there's folks who are trying to think about, you know, how do we think about rain gardens for flood mitigation? And when we think about areas that have had a lot, what things can people do locally? So I know this is an issue in Ward 2. And so there are some folks who are interested in that and thinking about like, how do we connect with county resources to help people to do that, even at the neighborhood level? So I think there's work that we can do. And I think a really big area for the city would be to really have included within our emergency plans to really be thinking about climate pieces in particular. And the different ways that it can show up for us, which include both power, which is a big deal, obviously snow, cold, water, heat, and some other things that could impact, you know, food and other things that I think we need to think about, both in terms of what the city can provide, as well as how we can help our residents to actually do some of these things like composting and things like that, which actually reduces our waste overall, and is actually a big issue when thinking about climate. Actually, we don't talk about waste management as much as we need to in terms of what has the biggest impact. So, yes.
Thank you. Would love to talk to you, and whether I get appointed to the council or not, would love to talk to you more about that.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions or nothing else that you'd like to share with us, thank you so much.
Just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I hope that my interest in the position and my love for the city has come through in my comments tonight, and I look forward to hearing back from you.
Thank you so much. Have a good
Thanks.
evening.
Thank you.
So we'll do what Aaron did before, and then
So for the record, there were 3 candidates asked to interview. Benjamin Connor Berry decided to withdraw from the process yesterday afternoon. So our second and final interview is with Jason Keach. You have a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, make any opening statement you'd like. Then council is going to go round robin and ask you a couple of questions each. At the end, there will be time for follow-ups and any sort of closing remarks you'd like to make. Please go ahead and proceed.
That sounds great. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor Brown. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Will Coxon, and council members for having me in tonight. I'm really excited to talk about the vacancy in Ward 2, and my background, and my love for Ypsilanti. I moved to this city in 2005 with my spouse to the Ward 2 area in Normal Park, and have lived in Normal Park ever since. We found a city that was welcoming and friendly, and we even joked a little bit that it kind of felt like that movie Pleasantville, if you ever saw that. Because all the neighbors knew each other, and they smiled at you and said hello when you walked by, and they loaned each other cups of sugar. And when we walked around the neighborhood, it even smelled different. It smelled like a cider mill, like some sort of special place. And then I found out we were just downwind of Dom's Bakery. So that was even better, actually, because Dom's is a great place to visit. So we moved over to West Cross after we added 2 daughters and needed a little bit more bedroom space, and would never think about leaving that area. It's just such a wonderful city and neighborhood, and I'm really excited to talk to you tonight a little bit about my background. You may have seen on my resume that pretty long history of service in one way or another for causes that I consider to be greater than myself. And that's what I'm hoping to bring to the table when it comes to Ward 2.
Thank you so much. So what we'll do is we're going to go around and each ask you questions. And then at the end, like you said, we'll have time for you to ask us any you have. So Councilmember 2, you can get us started.
Good evening.
Evening.
What experience do you have with the operations of a municipal government?
That's a great question. I would say very little, other than an observer and citizen. I think that, we've all seen kind of the stories that get out there, but I know that's not the whole story of what it takes to run a government and balance a budget and look to the future and try to make the decisions that are going to really impact this city. So I wouldn't pretend to really know what it's like to be in that seat, but I would certainly bring a mindset to get up to speed quickly and learn what it takes to do the job successfully, and listen to our constituents to make sure they're making sure their voices are being heard and reflected on the council.
Thank you.
Great. What are some of the most important qualities a council member should possess? What do you believe your role on city council will be for our community?
Yeah, I think it's really important to, kind of bring an empathetic ear to your constituents so that you know kind of what the vibe is out there in the community, and you can bring those concerns to council to try to bring results. I think that's probably the first and foremost thing that a council member should be, aware of, is that we're here to serve the citizens and help lead them to a place where this city is thriving more than it ever has been. Right? We want this to be the best place to live. So I think that on top of that empathetic ear, bringing integrity to the position is paramount. I think you have to be a person of your word and really come in with, the right motivations and, make sure that you're kind of living the values that we put up there on the wall.
Thank you.
If appointed, what is the biggest asset you would bring to council? And how will you work to achieve or incorporate that within the rest of council?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm a kind of a deliberate, rational person who really likes to give a topic a lot of thought and careful, measured debate before forming strong opinions. I mean, obviously there's things we all have strong opinions on, right? But there's things that I think we need to proceed with slowly and deliberately, and have that kind of friendly debate with each other. I've seen it in some of our past council meetings that I've attended or watched on YouTube or watched on live stream. And what I love about this city is even when we debate each other, it seems like we're all coming from the right place, where we have people's best intentions in mind. There's just more than one way to get there, right? So I think that's what I've seen of you in the past, and what I would hope to bring to the table too.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Explain your understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and how you see these interplay in Ypsilanti, and how would you support the advancement of racial equity in Ypsilanti?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's something that's very present in my work at the University of Michigan and our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. You may have seen on the resume, but I work in the philanthropy office for Michigan Medicine, and it's a pretty big team. It's about 130 people. And we, over the past, I think at least 5 years, have had a DEI committee that's making sure that we're really focused on having respect for a variety of backgrounds, whether that be race, ethnicity, religions, age, sexual identity and orientation, and making sure that we're fostering diverse teams, because we know those are what make highly productive teams, people that can bring a different kind of mindset to the table so that we can have those kinds of discussions that get us the best outcomes. Equity, I see equity as, giving people the support they need based on what kind of support they need. I don't know. You've probably all seen that cartoon of the three people of different height all standing on the box, and the short kid still can't see over the fence to watch the ball game, and the tall guy really didn't need the box in the first place, and the middle person's watching the game. But it's not enough to just treat everybody exactly the same and call that equality. I think you have to, bring people what they need based on what they need. And I see that in what you've been working on and some of the, kind of breaks in property taxes based on people who are struggling with income and having that kind of at a, 25, 50, 75% rate. Or looking at some of the housing developments and making sure that we have, partners who are bringing units to the table that are going to be affordable for people at various, area median income levels. So I think that's something that I've admired in council, and I think that's the kind of approach we need to take to make sure that, IPSI's not going to just be pricing out all the people that have wanted to be a part of this community in the past. And I count myself in that bucket. I came to IPSI because this was an area that had wonderful old historic houses, and it was much more affordable for a young family than it was in just about any other surrounding town. And I would hope that that's still the Ypsilanti that people are going to find next year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. But when you watch the property values go up and up and up, that that's probably not the case like it was when we came here. So I would certainly hope that we can increase that kind of housing stock and apartments that make sure that people of all backgrounds and all income levels can call IPSI home.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So why have you decided not to run during an election? Since this position will be up for an election in November, how will you be sure to still run a campaign that allows residents to learn about you, even with a short-term incumbency?
Thank you, Councilmember Simmons. That's a great question. And to be completely transparent, this has not been a long-term aspiration of mine. I've not been thinking about joining council going back to the last time it was on the ballot. But I saw the opportunity when Councilmember Simons resigned her position and talked to some friends and gave it a lot of thought. This is not something I wanted to jump into without a lot of consideration about what it would actually take to be a contributing member of this team and what would be expected of me in terms of my time and my nights and my weekends. And you saw me at the December meeting, and I've talked to a few other people just about getting a real assessment of what it would take to do this job well. And I think that's really where I'm coming from as far as, why it wasn't really something I was thinking about in the past. But after having these kind of conversations with various people that I respect, and one of them in particular even talking about, this is an opportunity to, be a role model for my daughters, and thinking about what that kind of service looks like to my own children. So that's kind of what inspired it. And then kind of the second half of that question, right, is making sure that people are still getting to know me when it comes time to, put my name on that primary ballot, and getting out there and knocking on doors. I've met a lot of neighbors in Ward 2, but I haven't met them all. So there's a lot of people still to go out and talk to, not just as neighbor Jason, but as potential council member Jason, and hear about their experiences in our community.
Good evening. The next question is, how would you work to do community engagement within Ward 2 and help build trust with the resident?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I think I have a lot of role models here that have already set a path for what that might look like. And whether it be, scheduling regular coffee hours where people can drop in and talk to you face to face, whether it's having an active social media presence so that we're pushing out, information to Ward 2 in a timely manner, or just making sure that, you know, people feel like they can talk to you and email you and actually hear back from you. So I think that that's one way. I'm sure there's things I'm not thinking of yet when it comes to how I'm gonna connect with the constituents in Ward 2. But it's something that I want to be very accessible to make sure that people feel like they can talk to their council member and get a reply. Thank you.
How would you approach a situation in which your personal opinion conflicts with the majority of your constituents?
Yeah, that's a good one. I've been thinking about that actually, because you know, I think it probably in some respects depends on the actual topic being debated, right? But mostly we're here to be a representative of that ward. And I think that's really the approach you have to take. If the citizens of Ward 2 feel strongly about a topic, then that's probably the way their council members should be voting, right? Now, I've also thought about, you know, what about a situation where maybe Ward 2 feels differently than Ward 1 and Ward 3? That's a little bit trickier, right? Because I think we also have to think about, you know, voting for what's best for the city and not necessarily just for one ward or the other. I think ultimately coming back to integrity, you know, at the end of the day, you have to make sure you're taking time to listen and then vote your conscience.
Thank you.
Thanks.
How do you handle criticism?
Yeah. You know, I think pretty well. I think like all of us, you know, at first maybe it stings a little bit on the inside, and but when people really give criticism, it's usually coming from a place of caring, or at least I think if it's delivered well, it is. If you take the time to give me some feedback on how I'm doing a job well or do a job poorly, some part of you cares, right? You care enough to help me be better or to commend me on a job well done. And that's always the approach I've taken when I've been a manager in some of those roles on the resume is, you know, it'd be easy not to, you know, kind of initiate that potential conflict with somebody by criticizing an action or giving them some constructive feedback. But the easy route's not necessarily the right route. That's not going to help somebody grow if you're not telling them what they might really need to hear. So that's kind of the approach I try to take in my head. If somebody has something to say about, you know, a statement I make or an action I take, I first just stop and listen and try to acknowledge that, you know, all opinions are valid. So I need to listen to that opinion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What do you think is the area of largest concern currently for the city as an organization, and how do you propose the city address this concern?
Well, I think our budget is probably the areas of biggest concern, right? I know that we've been on a tight budget ever since I've moved here in 2005, and I'm sure longer than that. I know part of that has been Water Street, and that's been kind of hanging around our minds and our budget for a long time. I'm optimistic that there's some solutions there. I'm encouraged that we've got some remediation coming up, and I hope that would make it a much more appealing project to develop. I'm sure that's just one of many, but I think like anything in life, you know, when you have a limited budget, this is the council that has to make tough decisions about what we say yes to and what we unfortunately have to say no to. And that's not easy because we have a lot of passionate citizens who are up here every meeting talking about what they're really excited about and what they hope you'll support. But with that in mind, you have to, you know, there needs to be reality-based budgeting where we can accomplish the things that are our highest priorities within that budget. And then at the same time, think about, you know, how do we expand the tax base in the future?
Given that the city of Ypsilanti has a great segue, given that the city of Ypsilanti has the highest property taxes in the area, what strategy would you use to decrease this burden on residents?
Yeah, that's also on everybody's minds, right? I mean, I think when when I came to Ypsilanti, we knew that the millage rate was high, right? But that was kind of in some ways offset by the fact that the houses were more affordable compared to surrounding towns, even if they had a slightly lower millage rate. So, I think, in some respects, the system plays out. When people bring millages to a vote, our citizens will either approve them or not approve them. I think what I've seen in the past is that we have very generous citizens who like to support causes they care about. But at the same time, we know that that's probably not an unlimited situation where we can't continue to increase that burden on people who are really feeling it in their budget every year. So I think, again, back to that point of what do we say yes to and what do we say no to, that has to be a variable that we're factoring in is the burden of property taxes and how people are feeling about, living in Ypsilanti and how much they pay to help make our city great.
Thanks.
If the city received $1 million grant, where would you allocate or prioritize the funding?
Just in lieu of, I think, what's been top of mind lately, I would look at our highest priority facilities projects and make sure that we have improved facilities for those who need it. I know that $1 million wouldn't necessarily do everything that we've been talking about, but it certainly could make a dent. We're an old city, right? We just celebrated our 200th birthday. So we've got some old facilities that need help. And I think that all of our city staff, our police, our firemen, our DPS staff, they need a place that's safe and comfortable and allows them to do their jobs well.
If there was one aspect of our government you could change, what would it be and why?
Oh, goodness. I think I know this is an issue with the state, but I think the Headley Amendment and the impact that has on local budgeting, capping how much property values go up is good, but when property values go down, we saw that happen in the crash of 2008, and what a drastic impact that has on the amount of resources that are available in the city. So, I think making sure that we've got long-term sustainable funding that's more predictable, right? I think that it's really hard for you to go in and make these decisions on a year-to-year basis and not really necessarily knowing exactly what's around the corner.
Those are all of our form questions. Are there any questions that you have for us or anything that you'd like to share with us that you did not get to say in answering their questions?
Yeah. What's your, just quickly, I guess, what's your proudest accomplishment while serving either as mayor or on council? In no particular order.
Oh, I can actually go ahead and go. This is my first year on council, and I would say my proudest accomplishment thus far is knowing that I am growing and beginning to have a bigger voice.
Well, I have to say, I saw you in December and you gave us that holiday message to go home and love on some people. And I took that to heart. And it sounded much sweeter coming from you. I don't know if it sounds creepy coming from me. But I appreciate it.
I would say I'm trying to think. I have so many. No. These past
You can tell me too if you need to.
months, So, but I will say, I'll go to something that happened very recently, which is, it was on a call. Somebody had called. Well, I guess this is anyway. Well, now there's like so many. Well, anyway, But I will say that when I have had people call with different challenges and issues, and they leave that interaction saying, you know, this was really helpful. I felt that you really listened. Thank you for caring. And that they feel, even if I couldn't solve the problem, they feel that they have a way forward, and that someone is trying to address a real material need. And so that definitely makes me feel really proud to be in this space.
I would say my proudest moment is actually just a learning experience. Because the people that I would serve, I guess, before this council seat by way of my organization, it'll be a completely different way of helping them then than it is now. So I guess the learning of municipal government and also getting new tactics of serving, put it into my bag to be able to help.
And then there were 3.
Mm-hmm. So many things. I've been up here a while now. I'll give a couple because they're the different buckets. One of them is just similar to Councilmember Simmons, is when I'm able to connect with someone who is really having a hard time, and either helping them solve a problem or connecting with the right folks or the right resources for them to be successful or feel heard or supported. Another proud accomplishment of mine, because it happened early on in my council career, was being able to advocate for the addition of youth seats on all of our boards and commissions. It took years for the iterations of council to finally support that. And it was something that I brought forward every year until it happened. So I was really happy to have that. We are always looking for youth, folks who are watching. I know we need youth on these commissions to fill the seats. And I racked my brain around how do we engage young people better to get them to actually sit the boards now. But anywho, and then I guess maybe most recently, the fact that we're bringing on new housing. We haven't had new development in the city in 50 odd years or so, maybe more. And so that's really exciting that, you know, during my tenure on council, we're bringing on units of housing that are affordable and attainable. So
That's great. I didn't talk about it much, but on the resume, a lot of boards that I've worked with that have really been, quite a highlight to work with people and help them accomplish a goal.
then there were 2.
Mhm. Steve.
I'll give you a moment.
That's fine. Go ahead.
There's 2 ways to answer that question. There's people who have done that. There are certainly projects that I'm proud to have advanced. And that's the easy, right? Public engagement for Penn Dam, getting that out and going and continuing to have, regular progress on that and working with the Huron River Watershed Council to advance that. That was a large majority of people were in favor of that. So being able to bring that closer to fruition and the interactions with folks in that, and advancing that public engagement. I'm a bit of an introvert. Maybe people don't get that, but it's a learning curve for being in a public space. And having one-on-one conversations is very much, I'm proud of the way I can do that. And I think one of the things, is being able to serve and bring voice from the people that I have those conversations.
I can go on the record saying I am also an introvert. But that's not the same as, it's not necessarily social skills, right? It's kind of like how you recharge your batteries after being in those social settings, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I got 2. I guess I'll start with one is kind of more personal for me. Through my connections professionally, was able to bring some grant funding from the state to offer free outdoor paddle trips for residents. And then also on the same hand of that, A large portion of that funding was also allocated for two of our key parks on the river, Riverside and Frog Island, for some key safety enhancements at that same time. So being able to bring some necessary funding to the city's benefit, the relationships that I've built was very critical and key. Second would be being a part of the process for the Avalon housing development and having the first supportive housing project soon to be developed within the city. So that was a long, lots of steps had to take place to get that to happen. And hopefully once construction's finished, it'll be a very key.
Well, I'll tell you, parks were a very close second place to that question about that bonus $1 million. So
Do you have any additional questions for us or anything that you'd like to leave us with?
I guess just in terms of the rest of the process, I know you're hoping to appoint somebody on Tuesday. Will we know in advance of that meeting, or will both applicants be here and then find out?
I would strongly encourage you both to be here.
Okay,
because we will.
I'll be here.
Once we vote or have our discussion and vote on Tuesday, typically that person takes their seat right
Immediately.
right in that meeting.
Okay.
So check out the agenda and
Oh, yeah.
be prepared.
Read ahead. Well, thank you. I don't think I have any other questions. I appreciate your time tonight, and I'll be here next Tuesday.
Thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Are we taking another break? Just let it go.
Sure.
All right, we're gonna take another fiver. Wait. All right, I'll call the meeting back to order. So, so we have the added city manager discussion. And so I'll open the floor for our discussion, I suppose. All right, well, I'll start talking.
Yeah.
I appreciate you adding that, Councilmember Sweet. So, today I was in correspondence with Amy Sell, and we did find that the dates that we shared, for our availability for the meet and greet did not work for both of our candidates. There's a conflict. And so I know that we talked I almost said last week, it was 2 days ago, about not wanting to move beyond that kind of week and a half, 2 week window that we had set in terms of making this decision due to all of the things that, we should be, we're holding off on working on without having this permanent role filled. And so I wanted to lift that first, for folks to know that it's unlikely that in my opinion, that it'd be feasible for us to have this meet and greet, being that those dates are not gonna work. And that would put us into February if we decided to continue on searching for dates. Now open the floor for anyone else who has anything at this time. I could definitely talk.
So what is the expectation for tonight regarding the conversation?
So I don't think there was necessarily an expectation, but rather to add the discussion so that I could share publicly that it's unlikely that we'll be able to have the meet and greet. But I do think that if that piece is not happening, what I would like to see is for us to make a decision. I feel like the sooner the better in this instance, since we can't feasibly do the additional portion, and we have completed all the steps of the process that we did lay out originally. So that's what I would like to see. I cannot single-handedly make that happen, but if you're asking me what I would like to do, that is what I would like to do. Councilmember Sweet. You have a hand?
Yeah. So with that in mind, I would like to move to extend a job offer to Mr. Andrew Halenga as the city manager for the city of Ypsilanti.
So before do we have to support or something first? Because
Let's have a second.
okay.
Yeah, support.
All right, now we can discuss.
Okay, so that is why I was asking, so I can be sure of the next steps.
Okay.
That is so like, is this a discussion or are we moving to move someone forward?
It could be both. Once the motion is on the table, we can discuss. So there's a motion on the table. And it's open for discussion.
So I was not prepared to have this conversation tonight. We talked about, I just wasn't prepared for this. You know, I came in thinking that we would discuss having this conversation on Tuesday when we do the other things, and there's things that I need to consider, that, would influence that vote. And I have not had time to do that. So I don't want to rush into this, and I don't, yeah, I'm not prepared to make that vote. I'm just not. So,
Councilmember Simmons?
Um, so I guess a question I have is like in terms of what we can discuss in this format. So I guess I would like a little bit of guidance from Mr. Barr on this in terms of what kinds of things we can talk about as part of this hiring process when we're talking about potential staff.
I did reach out to him earlier and he gave me feedback, but I'll let him share what that was.
Yes, thank you. First of all, the Open Meetings Act, I've looked at it and it's very clear. And in Michigan statute annotated, Michigan compiled laws 15268, section 8, F says, and I quote, all interviews by a public body for employment or appointment to a public office shall be held in an open meeting. So what that means is the discussion concerning the appointment has to be in an open meeting like we are today. And your question is, what can you discuss? And I can't give you a bright line on this, but my answer would be you can discuss anything that would be relevant to the position that you're searching. You can talk about education, you can talk about experience, you can talk about conduct, you can talk about personality, you can talk about availability, you can talk about energy, all of the things that you might want to discuss as far as the person being a appropriate candidate.
Mr. Barr.
Thank you. So that's helpful. So I guess I'll just focus right now since this is in terms of the motion that we have on the floor. Some of the things that I know as I'm going into this decision around the city manager position, thinking about what are the different qualities and skill sets and needs that I'm prioritizing in this decision. And so one, for the city manager position in particular, thinking about a handle on thinking about finances and budgeting strategy, thinking about the need for recognizing where Ypsilanti is right now and our need for creative and innovative thinking and ability to be able to understand how we can work toward longer term goals. And then I would say also being really strong in terms of leadership with staff and in the community. And I would say kind of across those, I would include communication in terms of yes, there's like response time, but that's not even as important to me as that when we have really, when there's important things to be communicated to council, that we understand the information so we can bring that into decision making, as well as so that we can bring it back to our constituents. And also that when we put things forward, that it is landing in a place with staff that can help it to become actionable. And so I definitely, so I wanted to just name those. I'm interested for others, kind of what things they're prioritizing as well. And a couple of things just to say about Andrew on this, in this space. I think that I was excited about some of the things when that he talked about in terms of or, you know, I'm interested in knowing kind of more of what he meant, I guess, around some of the pieces around how we budget differently, and thinking about, you know, better ways to meet the needs that we have as we have them, as well as, you know, thinking about the ways that he has some relationships already among staff as well as in the community. I found a lot of challenges and areas for growth. And I, you know, I'm not sure whether he sees these as necessarily areas for growth, but in some different, in quite a few different areas. And so it's raised concerns in terms of what it looks like to be kind of pushed into a position out of time and without good mentorship. And so a question I have is really what are we as council and, you know, other folks we would ask in terms of staff and community, how would we provide support to fill those big gaps, so that we're not setting someone up to not do well? Because in my time, you know, really focusing on council, we've had 2 city managers leave among controversy, and I don't want to be part of creating that situation.
Thank you. Any?
So for me to respond, far as like, as members, what are we prioritizing? For me, I am prioritizing experience. And again, it's kind of hard to know what I can say. I know Mr. Burr gave us some parameters, but for me, one thing I am prioritizing is experience. I know in the interview, Mr. Halinga, I don't know if I mentioned that, you know, he took responsibility for 599. And for me, we have a council member right now going through a recall because of that. So for me, that says maybe this person does need a little more training, and I am not ready to put this person forward at this moment because I am, again, prioritizing experience. And when Amy Sale came to us, that was one of the major requirements that she even came back and asked us to raise the salary because we didn't have candidates that were coming in that had enough experience. So we raised the salary. We have a candidate that has 5+ years of around 5 years of experience in city manager and has been assistant to a city manager. So for me, that is one thing that I am prioritizing.
Thank you. Councilmember Sweet.
I think too, when we talk about experience, I think we have to look at community size and staff size, et cetera, as well, to where these candidates are coming from. Being in a high ranking position in a smaller community is going to look different than it's going to look like in a larger community. And maybe you're not, at the highest level in a large community, but you have that experience because of larger budgets, larger staff, larger needs, larger departments. So I think it's hard to go by title and compare apples to apples unless they're coming from apples to apples agencies and organizations. And I don't know, that are two candidates right now. I would have to say that they're not coming from the same management and organizational background and experience. So I think you have to look at those two and not just specific to job title.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Sure. And we're going to have this discussion. These interviews were difficult, as Councilperson King said. We went back and we raised the salary for this. And there were, more people came forward I'm going to go through the process, so this might be a while. I'll just say I was surprised by the caliber of people that came forward. I know Andrew and I know what he's capable of and that, but in terms of other candidates came forward, somehow I had expected that there would be more depth to the candidates and there would be more experience. And so the person that the other candidate has 5 years of experience in municipal government as the captain of the ship, as if you want to use that, in two different places. And that speaks to, learning and moving through that decision-making process and taking ownership of those processes. To Councilperson Sweet's point, a day in Ypsilanti is worth a year in a lot of other places, right? And trial by fire. I know that Andrew's experience in previous to becoming the interim city manager, he acted as a mentor for staff and did problem solving, and that was below the radar in a lot of cases. I think that is certainly borne out in the feedback that we got from staff. He is looked at as a leader among them already, even among senior staff. So I take that very seriously. There are relationships there that are meaningful. Then there's the basic inside outside candidate considerations. With an outside candidate, you get someone who's had different perspectives, different experiences in other places, and brings a fresh eye to what's going on in the city. I don't know the cities that those experiences were gained in. I look at them in juxtaposition to the larger cities surrounding that. I look at the experience in Grand Haven as an intern and then as an employee and what that means. And so there's multiple communities of experience with that candidate. Then you try to balance that against the experience here in our home. And, what is the learning curve for folks coming into this situation? There's two different learning curves going on here. There's the person from outside who has a handle on responsibility and experience in terms of stated experience in terms of finance and other aspects. And then there's the experience here that is in multifacets of this community. There have been a number of times that there have been missteps, and that's part of that learning curve for the internal, experience. The question is, how does the experience of the outside candidate come to the inside candidate in terms of education and training? And how do we go forward with that? And Councilmember Simmons, talked about mentoring and how do you develop those skills? So in one case, you're developing skills, in the other case, you're developing relationships. And how do you weigh that? There are benefits to both of those things. Suggesting an open forum for conversation for the outside candidate was to get more information about some of the questions that I think needed following up on. And short of being able to have that personal conversation and outside of a forum where, and this is why I was down there before, is like, what does it look like to come in and sit at the table? I've done it before, but I haven't done it in a long time. I've been sitting on this side for a while. Some people interview well and some people don't. And I think Andrew answered a lot of questions very well and better than the other two candidates. And I wish there was more information coming from the other candidate. So it's hard to bear that out without a further conversation. And that's what I was hoping for. In light of the fact that that's not likely to happen, I was hoping to have a weekend to digest this and come back on Tuesday and make that decision. I don't even have the notes from the interviews in my bag. So going back to, I was just searching for that, and it was like, this was not something that was on my agenda today. So I feel that's some people could say we've had a lot of time to consider this. But when there was a desire to have more information, then that's not going to happen. I was hoping to better digest the information that I do have.
Councilmember King?
So that is part of my problem. I think because we have an internal candidate, he has an unfair advantage because we as some council members know more about him, have worked for him or with him longer. I think that gives him an unfair advantage. I think Vester Davis had a good interview. I think in many cases, he answered the questions before we even asked them. I think he has the experience in areas he said he didn't have experience in. He said that he sought out this information to make himself better in the position he is in today. I know he is in a smaller community, but we do know sometimes people move to bigger communities because they have outgrew where they are and they are trying to gain more experience and more knowledge in a different area.
Can I say something?
Comment, yeah, sorry.
One comment that I'll make is that I think that there are pros and cons to being both, right? There are pros to being an internal candidate, as you stated, folks already have relationship, but there's also cons to that too, because one of the things that has been raised are missteps that this person has made. And we only know those things because they're internal. We don't have any insight into similar or parallel experiences of our external candidate, and then vice versa. Right? The external candidate, we don't have a personal relationship with them, so we don't know as much about them as we know about the internal candidate. So I think that, to me, I would call that a moot point, because on both ends, there's a loss. And I just wanted to state that out loud, that it's not only an advantage on one end, there's an advantage for the other person as well in a different capacity. When you're coming externally, and we go off of you're presenting your best self in an interview. Most folks don't come in and talk about all of the mistakes they've made and all of the missteps that they've had. But when you have someone internal, there's no way to shy away from that because we already know it. We've lived it with them. And so I just wanted to state that in this moment.
Are we able to discuss the rubrics and like how each candidate fared on the council and staff side, or no?
Yes.
We are?
Mhm.
Okay, so on both council and the staff's average on the rubrics, one candidate is favored in both areas. So from municipal knowledge and experience, Andrew Halenga has 2 in comparison to Vester Davis's 1 on the council side. On communication skills and style, Mr. Halenga has a 3, whereas Mr. Davis has a 2. Leadership skills and style, Mr. Halenga has a 3, where Mr. Davis has a 1. Project management skills, both Mr. Halenga and Mr. Davis have the same count for 1 in the exceeds expectation side. Personal qualities, Mr. Halenga has a 4, whereas Mr. Davis, I'm sorry, has a 1. Financial acumen, they both have the same score. Then on to the back for community and economic development. They both don't have any checks in exceeds expectations, but in meets expectations, Mr. Halenga has a 3, and they both have a 3 in that area. So on the council side, I would say that the results favor Mr. Halenga more. And on the staff side, municipal knowledge and experience, Mr. Halenga has a 7, whereas Mr. Davis was given a 5 in that category. Communication skills and style, Mr. Halenga has a 5, whereas Mr. Davis has a 3. Leadership skills and style, Mr. Halenga has a 5, whereas Mr. Davis has a 3 again. Project management skills, Mr. Halenga has a 6, whereas Mr. Davis has a 3. Personal qualities, Mr. Halenga has a 7, Mr. Davis has a 5. Financial acumen, they both have the same score of 5. And then for community and economic development, Mr. Halenga has a 5, whereas Mr. Davis has a 3. So if we're doing these rubrics and we're all turning them in and they're being tallied up, I believe that these on the staff and council side speak to, go ahead. Speak to who each side, the council and the staff favor. So I would think that we have to take that into consideration if we're tasked to do this.
Thank you. Councilmember Simmons?
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing these forward. I have just a couple of things to say on this. Besides the fact that the council one we never actually have a full tally. So I just want to note that. we still somehow don't have a full tally. I also want to note
Why? I mean, we people can assume, but why don't we have a full tally? I just want it to be put out there. You said we don't have a full.
We don't have a full tally because we only have 5 of the 6 forms, the evaluation forms that were accounted for. I was thinking, even as we were thinking about this, that one of the things I was going to suggest, prior to this conversation coming forward, but something I was going to suggest for us is to redo it. So we have them all. I will also say that this is the first, so I'm in the midst of another hiring project. I know I've said this, I've been doing a lot of hiring things, but usually you actually have a chance to actually think and digest what you heard before putting something down that's supposed to have so much weight. So I don't feel like that actually, to me, that was one thing with the process. The other thing I will say is that, I've been going through the notes I took and put online were really capturing what people said. And there were many times where people said, oh, well, this person didn't say something. I said, but actually, if you actually look at what they said, they actually did talk about that. And so people were actually surprised by like, oh, wait a minute, so-and-so actually said something about that. I said, yes, actually, here's what was detailed. And when looking at, as an example, project management skills, when I was comparing that in particular between the two, I actually see like a huge discrepancy. And this is an area where I was like, I would love to hear from people. How were they actually doing? How were they actually going through and tallying? because, for instance, in project management skills, the questions that were under for that category were around people-centric versus car-centric development, an idea that was implemented, and how to determine projects that you would put forward. So those are the questions that connected with this particular piece. And when I actually look at what they talk about, I just want to pull this forward because I think it's important because so project management. So okay, so when talking about people-centric versus car-centric, Andrew talked about the complete streets, non-motorized plan, and trying to prioritize what was best, what has greater impact, and to get funding to build upon so the public can have buy-in. Vester Davis talked about being a zoning administrator, being involved in Michigan planning, and interest in making the community better. Work that to take a 4-lane road down to a 2-lane road that goes through town. So took initiative to have a study to make it more friendly. And you know, and named needs that the community saw and talked about like what some steps to do that in complete streets design. We have that very same exact issue here. When talking about an idea, a project idea, Andrew Halinga talked about getting a grant for scan tabulators to be more efficient in PPE and voting booths, so stuff during COVID to help move folks through. And Vester Davis talked about creating a dog park where there had been some goals set around it, but had not been action. And so focused on parks and rec life, building great public spaces was key. So got funding to bring the park to life, connected with other advocates in the community, as well as dog lovers to help design the space. And then that even council had to change even their thought on it because it's taken off and has been so popular, and that it has also brought other investment into that park. And now a space that was underutilized is now lively with a gazebo, a grill, and other things. And then when talking about projects, how to determine what to invest in, Andrew Halingo talked about things that have a large impact that help to move things and what's the relationship to larger projects, centering safety and taking a bird's eye view and then getting to the micro level. And Vester Davis talked about how important it is for city council to give clear direction with input from the team, having broad goals, strategic work sessions with council and staff so that they know what they're working for, providing regular updates, and having really tangible expectations about what to work on and understand things that might be in a parking lot, which might be a good idea, but maybe not the best idea right now. And so I just want to lay those out because it's been really frustrating to me, because when I look at then from council, how people were kind of judged across this level, it to me doesn't match. I don't understand how what he laid out does not meet expectations, because everything he gave actually to me, I'm like all 3 of those are things that we need. People talk about dog parks. I mean, we can literally take what he has done and see how that could actually help here. And he laid out very specifically some processes and how that would happen. So to me, I think that there's a discrepancy. So I wanted to put that forward. And I saw it in some other places, but this is the area where I saw it the greatest. And that was why I wanted to know about the tally so that we can then have a conversation so I could better understand, oh, well, where are the things that people saw things were missing or not in the different areas. And so that was just one piece. And then the other thing I just wanted to say too is that I think it's important. One of the things that Mr. Davis said during his interview that I didn't hear as much from Mr. Halinga was naming either areas of growth and or ways that he has gotten more training or has sought out professional development to better be able to do better in the job. And so I think that will be important no matter what. And one area that I think, based on the interview that I think I can see that would be a need for Andrew in particular, has to do with structural racism. And I'm going to say this based on looking at the affordable housing conversation in question. Let me just go to it. When asked about affordable housing, one of the things that, where can I find it? Oh, there it is. The conversation was around thinking about ways to move more affordable housing to other parts of the county, and not having a concentration of poverty, and needing to spread people into different places to help rise, everyone kind of to rise up in different ways. And I find this to be this was really a shocker to me personally, especially given the people that I usually hear that from in our community, and to understand what really goes into it, and that it's not just this, you have to have an analysis of what people actually need. And what does it mean to say we'll move people from the community that they live in to live somewhere else? And what does that mean for the people who aren't ready for new people to be there? And to not have necessarily the resources in terms of transportation, services, family connections, friend connections, and other things, and to recognize that the issues in our society, it's not just because poor people live together, it's because we don't invest in places where poor people live. And it's because we don't have the social and economic infrastructure to make sure that everybody's needs are provided for. And so to me, when I hear that, that is, I'll say as a learning jump, because in this community, if we are not going to promote gentrification, and if we are going to do things that support the people who actually already live here, we have to be able to take these things into consideration and have a strong analysis, and to not only go where some loud voices in power say we should go. And so when we have long-term goals that might, to help address and to help to lift the boats of those that are least advantaged in our communities, that I want to make sure that we have someone who will be able to hold strong and to work a plan, even if people say, oh, we just don't want this here because, we need to make sure that our taxes are less or whatever. And so it's a challenge because we do have these competing needs, and you can't always compromise it through. And sometimes you actually have to say, yes, this is what we're working on. This is why, and this is why this is important for our community. And so I'll just name that as an area that I think would need to be addressed, because we have talked about housing being such a high priority and such a big issue in our community.
Go ahead.
You can go.
Oh, okay. I just want to, some things that I was thinking about as I was listening to you, Councilmember Simmons, speak about like the different areas and things that you heard in the interviews. And I think what I've thought about and listening to the responses from both interviewees is around, again, going back to size of communities and experience and how that directly connects to someone's proximity to process and to some of these ideas that were shared. So for instance, the community that Mr. Davis is coming from is 15 full-time employees and then contractors, doing the work. Our community, there's 100+ employees day to day. We have department heads who are overseeing a lot of the projects. Some of the things that I heard you say that he talked about, I'm actually fully aware that we've either already done here in Ypsi and or have blueprints, plans to complete, but we can't get to any of those things ourselves because we have all these other issues that spring up or pop up, vacancies like the one we're trying to fill now, folks leaving council, people leaving because of a lot of other issues around morale and retention and employee satisfaction. And I think that for me, that is also paramount to think about when we're having this discussion too, that, maybe you see discrepancy in council's tallies and whatnot, and we also have tallies from staff and their feelings about who would they be most comfortable to be led by. I don't think either person is a bad candidate at all. But when I think about, again, morale and how do we execute some of these things that we've wanted to do, that actually are very well aligned with what Mr. Davis is saying he's done elsewhere. We've been wanting to do, trying to do, planning to do, and can't. That comes to mind for me around, how do we make sure that we choose a person that also our staff currently feel comfortable and want to be led by, and making sure that we're listening to the feedback they also gave us. The other piece on that is when we're thinking about someone needing training and development, I think that's an ongoing thing for any person in these type of roles. I mean, all the city managers that I've worked under have gone to additional training, have gone to different things to enhance their skill set and to continue to learn, as this is an ever-changing environment. And the piece that I want to add on to that is that we as council direct our city manager. And so kind of like the question that we asked in the interviews today about how do you balance, if your personal opinion or feelings are different from the constituents, it's the same, I would say, for a city manager around if your personal views as a city manager differ from what council is asking you to do. Well, we do direct them. So at the end of the day, I would want someone in the role, and I'm not saying either one would or wouldn't do this, that would acquiesce and go with the will of council, because that is the job. And so sharing what our expectations are, what are our goals, and how we get there is going to be paramount for us to do in order to direct that person to execute our vision. And I know I've talked a lot about how do we build that into this body and do better at having whoever is in leadership understand what we expect, what we want, and vice versa. What do they need from us and what do they expect from us? Because I think that has been lost in some recent years, that we haven't had clear conversation and expectation around what are we looking for from each other. And so I think that some of these things could be addressed in doing some more of that and being intentional about having those type of conversations. Councilmember Sweet.
I was going to mention some of the comments that you made, but I won't go into detail about looking at the evaluations from staff. I know that as a body, we pursued that with the contract with the talent search as a priority. So I want to make sure that we're also looking at perspectives from that, as those are going to be the individuals that are working day to day with this person to accomplish a lot of the goals, one set by the city, but also set by this body as council. And the second thing that I am going to bring up is I'd like to move to call to question.
So we have to have a second.
I still have things I want to say before that happens.
If there's no second, then that will fail. We won't do it. So call the question means to end discussion and move to vote. So you'd have to vote to call the question, and then if it passed, then you would go directly to voting without any more discussion. I don't know whose hand was first, but Mayor Pro Tem, and then we'll go back to you, Councilmember Sim.
Bringing up these evaluations that were filled out the night of the interviews. Those are first impressions. Those can change. These are they're not complete. They're first impressions. They, as much as staff's opinions are considered, there's to the last point, there's familiarity. And as I said before, Andrew has mentored a lot of these folks. And so there's that emotional connection to Andrew, and that's a very favorable thing. And change is a hard thing to look at. And so in any situation, I think that difference that you see here might be expected, unless the person was pretty horrible, right? So there's certainly a bias that is possible in that. I'm not saying that there is, but just in those kinds of questions, there can be a bias. And we have to take that into account. The thing that didn't come up in your tally of what these things are is you're only looking at the times where it exceeds expectations. And I have to say that personally, I was a little more generous with people that night than I am on further reflection. And so that would have changed considerably. And that's why I wanted more time to go back and look at those answers to deliberate on this, not tonight, but next week. There are lots of cases in one point, if we were going to look at this, is that, when you say that they matched on a financial acumen, they each had one that meets or exceeds expectations. Mr. Halenga has some further down in that line that Mr. Davis doesn't. So Mr. Davis either meets expectations or exceeds expectations, and Mr. Halenga has marks in two other categories. So it's not just looking at the exceeds expectations is not a true valuation of what these tell us. So having said that, again, I don't want to be put in this position tonight for a couple of different reasons. A, none of our constituents know that this conversation is going to happen tonight. This got put on the agenda at the very end. This was precipitated by information that people are not privy to. And that just came today. And so that is making this conversation happen. And I'm just not comfortable with that. You have your notes here and you've been able to go through that, and that's been helpful. I'm just not there.
Councilmember Simmons and then Councilmember Sweet, sorry.
So Evan, to your point, around thinking about the staff, this is one of the reasons to me when we first saw the summary of folks that people would recommend for the position. I actually saw that council was out of step with staff in that even in that range, and that and so it's hard because even with thinking about that, I actually don't feel like it is leading all in one direction. I actually think that staff saw more, I think staff saw that they could work with both of our candidates actually. And I've heard some staff say that actually seeing them, seeing Mr. Davis interview with us was different than the interview with them. I also have questions about what kind of questions the staff was asking too. I don't know that. And whether there was much more specific questions or things that they might have been asking in that space. But either way, I just want to say that based on what the evaluations are, I don't feel that there was actually one direction from staff in terms of who they thought they could work with. So just to kind of bring that forward. I do think in terms of the kind of feedback I've been able to get from the community so far, I've had some folks who have definitely say that they favor Andrew. Some haven't necessarily considered the other candidates, so they kind of favor because again they know, and because he has provided really strong service in the past to them, and so so I have gotten some of that. I have gotten, it's not all been one way. I definitely would like to have more conversations or hear more from folks. I know I shared this earlier, just being like a little surprised by, how little we have heard, I think, from people in this format, given how much people were kind of coming forward and with some other really big issues that I think this is connected to our city manager, but I did try to put this out and get some feedback from community members. And so I definitely have a minimal amount, not not an overwhelming amount. I do agree with Mayor Pro Tem Wilcoxon around people not knowing that this was going to be on the agenda tonight. So there is that piece. And I also appreciate the desire to kind of be able to move things forward that have been sitting and waiting. I think that this decision that we make will impact the city for at least 5 to 10 years. And so it's really difficult to really lean into urgency with that. And also recognizing that I don't know, time doesn't really exist. So
Councilmember King had her hand up.
Oh, okay. So I just want to say a couple things. During this process, we talked a lot about experience, but when it matters, I don't think it's fair that we dismiss or diminish Vester Davis' experience because he's from a smaller community. Again, I want to note that some of the tallies are inaccurate because we did not have all the tally sheets from council. I'm not sure how that happened, but for me, that also makes me question how accurate even the other information is, because we have a council sitting in front of us that stated everybody turned in their sheets. But Amy Sale is saying, hey, I didn't get somebody. So we don't know where the discrepancy is at. Is it with Amy Sale or is it with us here at council? So for me, it makes me question the whole tally, it makes me question that. And it was brought up that, okay, staff, that may be correct because all of their sheets was turned in. So we had 8 staff that said yes to Andrew Halinga and 6 that said yes to Vester Davis. So as Desiree stated, Councilmember Simmons stated, I think staff shows a willingness to work with either party. I also talked to staff and I had some staff members say, hey, I don't mind working with either candidate. Some favored one over the other. And many of them stated that, Vester Davis would be a fresh look as well and a fresh win and a fresh perspective for Ypsilanti with the experience and the knowledge and the skills that he has.
Thank you. I want to briefly just touch on these tallies. These tallies were us to get information. They are not the decision maker. So I recognize that one of them is missing and I don't know how that happened. Again, I can't speak to how that happened either. But to me, overall, that is less important than us synthesizing our information and making a decision. I mean, this is just gathering information for us to see at first glance after the interviews, but this is not the decision maker. So I just wanted to be clear that even though those are missing, it does not dismiss the process that we had. We all heard the interviews. We all took our notes. We all were present. Just to be clear, this is not a decision maker, so.
And so I just want to just point of information, and that's not what I'm saying, but because they are being brought into this equation, I think we need to let everybody know that we did not have every sheet turned in.
Oh, we said it
Yeah.
on Tuesday and we said it today, so I think everybody knows.
Mhm.
I don't know where the other one is. We don't have them all, no, but we have the majority for information purposes. And then Councilmember Sweet had his hand up, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, now that we know that the meet and greet that we had originally discussed, right, is not happening. And we've already lost one candidate, right, a while previous to that. So the longer we draw this process out, do we run the risk of losing additional candidates? Potentially, we don't know that.
Yes, we do. We do know that.
Okay, so we run the risk of losing candidates the longer we draw the process out. So we know we're not waiting for this meet and greet to happen the end of next week. We've wrapped up the interviews, and I feel like if we're not ready to make a decision tonight, then we need to come prepared on Tuesday to make a decision as a body, to get a person in this position, to get things moving and going. There's been, it's already been stated, but I'll say it again, a lot of things been put on hold that have not happened because we have not had a permanent manager in this role. So, right, post interviews, knowing that what we anticipated is not happening, I think it's time that we need to and should have information available to us to make a decision for this critical position.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, I saw your hand as well.
Yeah, a couple things. I'm perfectly willing to bring this back on Tuesday and make that decision. That is, I thought where we were going with this in light of new information, but I wanted to address a point that Councilmember Simmons made about one of Andrew's responses in terms of affordable housing and poverty. Concentration of poverty. So I've heard a lot of people say that. You know, you gave an example of somebody in a private conversation that I appreciate, that you know, that but I don't want this to be guilt by association either. You know, I've attended countywide you know, conversations about affordable housing, and I've heard from people in other communities who work in affordable housing, and they have said themselves that Ypsilanti has done a disproportionate amount of work in this regard compared to other communities. And they openly acknowledge that their communities have not done the work that they should be doing, and they hold up Ypsilanti as actually, you know, an example of what they should be striving for. And I know that doesn't, you know, in the day to day that may not seem that way, and we hear otherwise all the time, but that is the case. That I've experienced that and had those conversations with those folks. In terms of having folks, the idea that we're pushing people out of, and by that statement that we're pushing people out of this community, I think the exact opposite is actually true, and that the developments that we have attract people from other communities here, and I think that, you know, is one interpretation of that statement, is that we take people in from outside. And, you know, every development that we've talked about since I've been on council, there is that we've tried to find ways to find, you know, to prioritize our current residents, but in those programs, there's no way to do that. And so, as we've seen in previous developments, a lot of people from Detroit come, a lot of people from Ann Arbor come, because there's housing here that there isn't available in those places. And so we see that influx of people. And so, you know, while there is, you know, the different opinions on concentration of wealth and things like that, the fact that it's not necessarily the case that we're pushing people out. And so I just wanted to address that and there, so I don't slight, Andrew for that answer and necessarily, there's more to the background of that and that's something I would need to have a conversation with him about as well. I would appreciate if we could make this decision on Tuesday, that we could have this vote at the same time we come in and then we see two different people in two different positions that will move our city forward.
Were there other, I feel like this way I saw other hands, but I'm just. I agree with actually the last two sets of statements that were shared. But particularly, I think that if folks are not comfortable voting on this tonight, I don't think that we can delay this beyond Tuesday. And I know I kind of interjected when Councilmember Sweet said we run the possibility of asking the question, do we run the possibility of losing candidates? And I can tell you that the answer is yes to that. And I've spoken to you all and you're aware. And so I think that no matter what, we have to make a decision by Tuesday. So saying that, I'm gonna ask, are you willing to withdraw?
I withdraw the motion.
Are you okay with withdrawing the motion?
Support.
Aaron, how do we go? Do we just say we want this added? I want this added to the agenda for Tuesday. Thank you.
I think it should be after the Ward 2.
Yes.
I don't think it's fair for Ward 2 to not have 2 votes on this. So if you're
Wait,
okay with
say it again, not to have 2 votes on it?
so Ward 2 first and then city manager, is that? Or
I actually think the other way around. I don't think that, because then that would, I want to be, okay. Mr. Barr, can you give us some direction on that? I think the piece of it is I would hate to put someone in a position to have to vote on this that was not involved in this process. I think that's not, I wouldn't think that's equitable or fair.
Council has the option on setting the agenda and setting the time that the two different decisions are made.
Mhm.
If you decide on the vote for the Ward 2 first, then that person would have a seat and be able to vote. They may or may not vote, but they would have the opportunity to.
Personally, I think that they were not involved in this process or any of these discussions, and I don't know if that would be fair to me. I don't know.
I agree.
There's also the distinct possibility that there's a tie vote. So in that case,
Then what?
We keep going around. We've had it happen before.
I vote for which office?
or well, for either because.
Oh, for
we have
both,
6
because we-
people.
yeah,
One.
for either.
Well, And according to the charter, you need 4 votes to pass something. So if you don't have 4 votes on one or the other, or if you're not gonna have 4 equal, but so then the motion doesn't pass and you go back to square one.
You start over. Yeah, so you start over until you pass something.
And you can, if you tie it, then I guess you could have another vote on the situation.
Now, I have been involved in something like that before, where it went around and around and around.
I've watched that.
You watched it happen.
Yep.
And that's basically what would happen if it's split. Then someone can move the next thing. If that is split and it fails, then you start over, and then you start over until we have an outcome. Hope it doesn't. It's not fun.
Not either. I just want to say thank you for rescinding the motion. And thank you for giving me that grace.
Okay. Mr.
I might also say that for the Ward 2 candidate, there is a charter time limit.
Yeah, we have to decide on Tuesday for that for
not
sure as
for the
well.
city manager.
Yeah, so we have to make that decision Tuesday, for sure, for sure. But I think it feels the same for both. Is there further discussion before we move to public comment? Or are we all good for now? All right, this is our second opportunity for public comment. You have 3 minutes to address council. We don't have anyone physically in the audience, so if there's anyone on Zoom, please raise your hand.
on Zoom wants to speak, press the raise hand button.
Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned.